Hey everybody, welcome back. It's been a while, but this is the first video in the Shane Plays Tomb of Annihilation Notes series, where I'll give my notes and thoughts as I DM my party of intrepid players at my friendly local game store through Tomb of Annihilation, which is a 5e adventure set in basically D&D Africa in the Forgotten Realms, a land called Chult. That also has lots of dinosaurs and undead, and it's also got a tie into a classic, very classic D&D module. So anyway, welcome back. I have been meaning to get to this for a while, and have no fear. We're going to go through Tomb of Annihilation just like we did Out of the Abyss. So it's going to be a lot of fun. If you're new to this video series, to my videos when I do this, this isn't an actual play. It's not a blow by blow of every little thing that happens. What it is it's just kind of a guide to, like, here's how I ran the adventure. Here's some notes on running the adventure, and also here's some just thoughts on DMing and GMing, and rules clarifications for D&D 5e and all that good stuff. And since this is a new series, I do want to please remind my players, if you're watching this, I can't keep you from it, literally, but I would very much prefer that you didn't, because I may talk about, even after stuff has happened, I may talk about stuff that's coming, or thoughts I may have. So I'd appreciate it if you waited until after the adventure's over, just like you did with Out of the Abyss and White Plume Mountain and all that before you watch the video series. So I appreciate that a whole lot. Normally with these videos, I do a little bit of viewer feedback, and then I'll do some rules clarifications, and then I'll jump into what happened in the most recent session or sessions. So there's not going to be a lot of viewer feedback for this video because it's video number 1 in a new series. However, I do have a couple of comments and notes and stuff like that from the finale of Out of the Abyss and some other stuff I want to mention. So I'll put on my +3 spectacles of viewer feedback and or other things I want to mention and or rules clarification, and we'll dig right in. So here we go. First of all, did have a few comments on the finale of D&D Out of the Abyss number 83. Most of them, which I always appreciate, were along the lines of thanks for doing this series. It's very helpful. As I've said many times, the reason I do these D&D videos like this, where I recap my campaigns as I'm DMing them, is because so many people say they're helpful. So that's why I do it, and I really appreciate it. So, but on to a couple of comments. James Swanson on D&D Out of the Abyss notes number 83 probably gave me my favorite listener comment or viewer comment I've ever had on one of these D&D videos, and he simply said, "Lights cigarette." So thanks, James. That sums up so much about how you felt about how everything went and how the finale was and all that. So it's just needs a cigarette after that. So thanks, man. And then James also mentioned where his party was at, and they still have about 8 sessions left. And Out of the Abyss, especially the second part, is so crazy. It's just a lot of fun to run. So James, hope you're still having fun with that if you haven't already finished. And then another thing I wanted to point out is Firelord Singer, and it's Firelord, that's one word, and then Singer is a separate word, so 2 words. Firelord Singer has commented that he's also doing his own D&D recap videos and that sort of thing. So go check out Firelord Singer over on his channel. Like I said, just search for Firelord, separate word, Singer, D&D or something like that, and I'm sure you'll find it. So that's pretty much it for the viewer feedback. So a couple of other things I want to mention that I found helpful, and I thought other people might as well. One, Zac Arbuckle contacted me through my Shane Plays Facebook page and sent me a spreadsheet that he created on Google Docs. Now, this would have been handy to have during Out of the Abyss, but maybe some of you are still playing it, and I think he put it together fairly recently. But it's a spreadsheet of every major NPC in Out of the Abyss, along with what chapter or chapters you're likely to encounter them. So that's very helpful. I'll link it in the show notes. So if any of you are still playing Out of the Abyss or running Out of the Abyss, I would definitely check that out. And thanks so much, Zach. I'm going to spread that link around because it's very helpful. It's amazing to me what players will come up with that seems obvious that should be in the adventure book, the campaign book, but maybe Wizards of the Coast didn't have time or they just didn't think of it or whatever. But this is one of those resources that is much needed because there's so many moving parts in NPCs and Out of the Abyss. Another thing I want to mention, something that was very helpful for me for getting ready to run not Out of the Abyss, Tomb of Annihilation, and to actually run it, is I found a thread on Reddit, and I'll link this in the show notes, and it says all freely available Tomb of Annihilation maps, and it's got the player map of Chult, player handouts, not just maps. There's a lot of handouts in Tomb of Annihilation. There's all these different maps. There's and in Tomb of Annihilation, something I'll mention here in a little bit, there's a map of the continent of Chult, and one is to give to the players that's not completely filled in. Another one is for the DM. And there's a handout you can give to the players that my players liked a lot. And so there's, and the main dungeon, the Tomb of the Nine Gods, there's maps for all the levels. So this is extremely helpful. So I'll put a link, but it's in Reddit, and the thread is all freely available Tomb of Annihilation maps. So I'll make sure to link that. It's a really good resource and, much needed. It's got extra stuff basically make your own handouts of stuff that should have been handouts anyway, and a lot of it already is. I'm not saying they didn't give any handouts in this book, but this Reddit thread will take it even a step further. So that's basically it for, kind of viewer feedback and some tips and notes. I'm sure there'll be more, to come as we go. I tried with Out of the Abyss to, really highlight helpful resources. So I'll try to do the same thing with Tomb of Annihilations. Hey guys and gals, one thing I forgot to mention during my main video recording, which I definitely meant to, is I've got a book coming out May 12th. That's right. Yeah, an actual book. It's an updated version of this, which is Dungeons and Desktops, which was written by Matt Barton, Professor Matt Barton of Matt Chat. And it is a history of the computer role-playing game. I'm a huge fan of tabletop role-playing games like D&D, but I'm also a huge Dungeons and Desktops CRPG nerd. So I was fortunate enough to ride shotgun on updating this book to 2nd edition, and it's available for pre-order now. I'll put a link in the show notes and put a screenshot of the cover and everything. It's available for pre-order now on Amazon.com. And it'll release on May 12th, and it is an updated version of this. This book was written 10 years ago, so the new version has 10 more years of computer history, computer role-playing game history, including the Kickstarter renaissance, where all these amazing computer role-playing games have been out there because of Kickstarter. Also revised a lot of the existing content, added a bestiary of quick lookup on a lot of computer role-playing games that we couldn't cover in depth. And then it's got all color screenshots and corrections and updates and all kinds of cool stuff. So if you're interested in that at all, go check it out. It's Dungeons and Desktops, The History of Computer Role-Playing Games, 2nd edition. And it's got a cool new cover that's inspired by Pool of Radiance, which was one of the first major computer role-playing games, and it's got my buddy Matt on the front and all dramatic and all that. So I'll put a link in the show notes. Sure would love it if you checked it out and maybe ordered yourself a copy. It's Dungeons and Desktops, The Complete History of Computer Role-Playing Games, 2nd edition. I'm going to take off my +3 spectacles of viewer feedback and or helpful tips and resources and or rules clarification. We don't have any rules clarifications for this episode, and we'll get on into this video is mainly going to be, there'll be a little bit of a recap of how I started things, but it's mainly going to be an introduction to the adventure and things you need to know to get ready for the adventure. My personal campaign, our group, we did a session 0 for this campaign to let everyone, all get together, roll up characters, and kind of give them information they need to know to get ready to go. And then I think we did a little bit of role playing, just enough to set it up, and then the next session is where we really dug into it. Now, session 0, if you're not familiar, it's a concept that's gaining a lot more popularity. For years and years, decades, most role-playing games, campaigns and whatnot, is, people roll up their characters and then they bring them, to the game, and then, you rip the cord and off you go the first session into the adventure. Well, there's more and more of a, I don't know if movement's the right word, but a popularity in having a session 0. And I've had some people put it to like, you cannot have a, if you don't do session 0, you're not doing it right. And I mean, I respect the enthusiasm for session 0, but I mean, we've been doing it for 30 or 40 years without session 0. So my point is, you don't have to do session 0, but it's not, if you have the time, if you have the extra session to do it. It's not bad. Everybody, you can answer everybody's questions, and people can feed off each other and the kind of characters they're going to make, and you can kind of answer questions and set things up, and it was fun. I think that's the first time I've done an outright session 0, and it worked well. So that's what we did. And then, the next session was, after a little bit of an introduction, we just, boom, in we went, into the main adventure. So another thing that I'd like your feedback on, I've talked about this a little bit online, and I even have Morris has a podcast from Ian World, and he was looking for listener questions, and I sent this in just for discussion. But I'd love to hear your take on running an adventure or a campaign and letting the players create their characters without knowing what the campaign or adventure is going to be. And this was something that it wasn't an idea that I was, dead set on. It was just sort of a thinking out loud. I was like, what do you guys think about rolling up characters and then not knowing what you're going to do? And almost everyone's like, yeah, we could probably try that. But one of my players was like, no way. They just didn't like the idea. And it wasn't, like I said, it wasn't something I was just like, I got to do this. So I just kind of went, okay, that's interesting, and moved on, and didn't push it or anything like that. But here's, and their, I talked with them later, and their side was, well, how do we know what kind of characters to make if we don't know what kind of adventure it is, et cetera, et cetera. And, and I kind of thought about it, and what I think it would come down to is, if somebody really objects and say, I don't want to do that, then I think it really comes down to, maybe they don't trust the DM to treat them fairly, or to, if there's something vital for them to know, to share that. For example, if I was going to have an adventure that was all underwater, or all intrigue, all court diplomacy and intrigues and all that, that would require a little knowledge up front in how you're going to make your character, probably, right? But for most of your, Forgotten Realms, generic D&D, high fantasy, medieval fantasy type adventures, you don't really need to know all that if you have a well-rounded party, right? If you're thinking, okay, what are the typical kind of challenges that adventurers encounter, which could include diplomatic stuff, or traps, or monsters, or single combat, or dragons, or whatever. Then if you create a well-balanced party, I would say you don't really have to know ahead of time, right? And as a DM, one of the things that we talked about, that this thought and discussion led to, was that, I don't have to let you know everything up front. I don't have to, spoon feed you what's going to be happening. In fact, I reserve the right as DM to tell an interesting story, to pull the rug out from under you, or to, do a little smoke and mirrors, or do a little deception in order to tell an interesting story and to challenge the players. So, and I think that's, it really comes down to, if you have an untrustworthy DM who's just a jerk, like I said, that would send you into an all underwater adventure and not give you any idea that, it's a different kind of campaign, or put you into some unusual style adventure where, you would really need to know in advance, maybe not what's going to happen in the story, but that, hey, the world setting is unique in certain ways, then I could see you say, no, I don't want to, I don't want to do that. I don't want to go in blind. But, realistically, if you tell a good story, the players or the characters in a novel or a movie, they don't know what's coming, right? And so, to me, it's interesting to think about, how much information do you really have to share as a DM with the party, with the players before they roll up their characters? And, I had thought about, because you can start Tomb of Annihilation at 5th level, and there's also notes for starting it at 9th level, although most people will start it at 1st. I had thought about going through Dungeon Heist, which is a 1 through 5 level adventure from Wizards of the Coast, because we've been talking about doing Tomb of Annihilation, but I hadn't 100% said I was going to do Tomb of Annihilation. So I had thought about doing a switcheroo, and they think they're going to do Tomb of Annihilation, and boom, we do Dungeon Heist, get to level 5, and then we go to Chult for Tomb of Annihilation. So I had thought about doing that. I didn't. I went ahead and started with Tomb of Annihilation. So anyway, there's no, this is one of those things, there's not really it kind of depends on group to group, DM to DM, party to party. Can you do this or not? Or should you do this or not? But I'd love to hear your thoughts on, on that. Should the players always know in advance which adventure they're playing or campaign they're playing before they roll up their characters? And I'd love to hear, and there's pros and cons on both sides. But anyway, okay, enough of that. Let's keep going. All right. So what I'm going to do is, with this video, I'm going to basically just give you a lot of what you need to know to get ready for Tomb of Annihilation. Just like I did with my session 0, there's not going to be a lot of recap here, although there'll be just a little bit on the role playing. So let's dig in. Okay. So Tomb of Annihilation, first thing you need to know, this is a Sararak. Okay. It's kind of, there he is. He is a famous lich. I mean, he's an arch lich. This is like a lich on the level like Vecna or something like that. Very, very, very bad dude. And also you see this, you can kind of see half the face there, and then the other half is here. That's famous imagery from D&D, from the Tomb of Horrors. Now, a Sararak, and it's a Sararak, I believe, but Sararak's how I say it. Probably somebody else pronounces it differently. Is an archlich who is very, very powerful. Most liches, and a lich is basically an undead archmage who's now undead, and their life essence is protected somewhere in a phylactery, and then they're bad to the bone, no pun intended. They're beyond most undead. And most of them, when they get to the level of a Sararak, they go on to become gods or something like that, or try to. And a Sarak's like, nah, it's not really my thing. So I think I'm pretty sure Tomb of Horrors was a Greyhawk setting adventure, either that or it was just generic. You had Tomb of Horrors, which was like I said, a classic module from like back in the 70s, and it was used in tournaments and that sort of thing, and it was considered what's called a funhouse dungeon. Tomb of Horrors and White Plume Mountain are probably the most famous examples of a funhouse dungeon, which it doesn't really make any sense. It's just a series of crazy challenges and monsters just all kind of thrown together to give the players very difficult obstacles to overcome. Some were combat, some were puzzles, some were a combination of both. For example, this this famous sort of mouth here. You can see that. I believe there was like a sphere of annihilation or something. If you put your hand in there, would Tomb of Annihilation, right? From Tomb of Horrors. So you've got a Sararak, and to explain, well, why is this dungeon so crazy? And you remember, it was used in tournaments to score points based on what certain players did or didn't do or whatever. They would score points, and then they would be awarded. You won the tournament or whatever. Your party got the most points or whatever. But to kind of explain that, a Sararak, instead of wanting to ascend to some weird evil deityhood, to relieve his boredom, likes to design crazy dungeons and then basically put adventurer bait in the dungeons, and in the adventurers come and he likes to kill them in new and interesting ways. Or he also, like it talks about in this book, he likes to create evil gods and unleash them on the mortals. He's just bored, he's just like, well, here I am, I'm this huge archlich, and what do I do now? So that's how he passes his time. Well, in Tomb of Annihilation, he's jumped from Greyhawk, Oerth, I believe is how you say that name, to now he's in the Forgotten Realms. And in Chult, which is basically Forgotten Realms Africa, not exactly, but kind of close, he's got this crazy dungeon, which will be the climax of the adventure. So that's a little bit of backstory there. There's this thing called the main conceit of the thesis, adventure hook, whatever. There's this thing called the Soulmonger, and it's a magical item or artifact that is kind of a MacGuffin of the story to bring players in and get them to Chult and get them to searching. But as the book tells you, fairly early on in chapter 1, or actually in the introduction, there's a death curse. Okay, and at the beginning of the adventure, it's been active for 20 days. This death curse. So the Soulmonger was activated by a Sararak 20 days ago, and so while the Soulmonger is active, there's some very important effects that are in play that change some of the nature of the normal D&D ground rules, basic mechanics and spells and stuff. So any humanoid on the planet, and now they're in Faerun. If you set this in Faerun, which assumed it will be, but you could put it in other settings, has been brought back from the dead. Any humanoid that's been brought back from the dead begins to waste away. Its hit point maximum is reduced by 20, one for each day the Soulmonger has been active, and decreases by 1 every midnight until the Soulmonger is destroyed. If a humanoid's hit point maximum drops to 0, it dies. Traveling to another world or plane does nothing to halt the wasting effect. Once it's begun, it's begun. A humanoid whose hit point maximum is reduced can increase or restore it. This is true whether the creature's hit point maximum is reduced by the Soulmonger or by some other life-draining effect. If a humanoid dies anywhere on the planet, its soul becomes trapped in the Soulmonger. Only the destruction of the Soulmonger can free the trapped soul. Any spell that breathes life into the dead, including Revivify, Raise Dead, Resurrection, and True Resurrection, automatically fails if cast on a humanoid whose soul is either trapped in the Soulmonger or has been devoured by the Atropal. And then that's a being that a Sararak is trying to collect souls into the Soulmonger to feed to this Atropal. The Soulmonger does not affect the workings of Speak with Dead or spells or similar magic. So you can still do Speak with Dead or whatever. And the death curse has no effect on pre-existing ghosts or spirits. So there is an NPC named, it's Sandra, I believe. Let's see. Yes, Sindra Sylvain, who hires the NPCs to go to Chult and try to find the Soulmonger and put an end to the death curse. People know there's a death curse. They know there's something called the Soulmonger, and they know it's in Chult. That's what, you know, divining and researchers show. But that's all anybody knows, or like Syndra or anybody knows when the players are first sent on the adventure. Now, you might ask, why are first level adventurers being sent on such an important, task? And so there's a couple of ways you can address that. One, there's notes in the book on page 8, and that's also where on page 7 was where I was reading you about, or 6 is where I was reading about the death curse. On page 8, there's notes for starting at 5th level and starting at 9th level. So if they're starting at 5th level, you know, here's how to adjust. And if they're starting at 9th level, here's how to adjust. 9th level, they're already like basically you get them into the heart of Chult as soon as possible. And it is Chult. It's not Colt. I looked it up. It's C-H-U-L-T, so it's Chult like chalk, right? Okay, because I had to look that up myself. Now, Chult is not new to D&D 5e. It's been around for a while. But I think a lot of the crazy stuff that's going on in the game, or in this adventure, is new to 5e. So, let's see. The soul of any humanoid that dies while the death curse is active, we're on page 7 now, becomes trapped inside the soulmonger. The soul remains there until it is consumed by the atropal or the soulmonger is destroyed. Once a soul becomes trapped in the soulmonger, it's only a matter of time before the atropal destroys it or devours it. You can determine the status of a trapped soul at dawn on any given day by secretly rolling a d20. On a roll of 2 or higher, the soul remains trapped, at least until the next dawn. On a roll of 1, the soul was devoured by the atropal. A creature whose soul was devoured in this horrible manner can't be returned to life by any means, including divine intervention. It's gone. Divine intervention won't even work. If the soulmonger is destroyed and you haven't been tracking the status of a particular soul trapped within, grab a handful of d20s, 1 die for each day the soul was trapped, roll them together. If you roll a 1 on any of the dice, the soul was devoured before it could be set free. Spells such as commune and divination can be used to determine whether a soul has been devoured or whether it's still trapped in the soulmonger. How many souls must the atropal devour to become a god? Remember, there's this crazy being called an atropal that a Sararak is feeding souls to turn it into a god, an evil god, so it can unleash it on mortals and for his amusement. It could be thousands or millions. Ultimately, it's the DM's call, but the default assumption is that this apotheosis could take months or years. So, a couple other things to mention here. You can play this game this adventure as a meat grinder, which makes it even more difficult. Now, I'll speak here in a second. This is a difficult adventure. This is not this adventure could easily kill players. Okay, just like the original Tomb of Horrors was a player killer. Now, I'm not saying it's as deadly as the Tomb of Horrors was, but as D&D adventurers go, this one is can be pretty deadly. So just be aware of that. But you can play it as written. This is on page 6 and 7. You can play it as written, or you can make it even more difficult by running it as a meat grinder. Okay? Now, this says in here you must choose to run the adventure as a meat grinder from the very beginning in this mode of play. In this mode of play, the soulmonger gains the power to draw characters who are close to death, and the following rule applies. A death saving throw succeeds on a roll of 15 or higher instead of 10 or higher like normal. This effect ends when the soulmonger is destroyed. Other rules concerning death saving throws remain unchanged. Now, what I'm probably going to do is, as the adventure progresses, I think I'm going to start increasing the death save difficulty. So right now it's at 10, and it's probably going to be 10 for a while, which is the normal difficulty. At some point, I'll probably bump it up to 12 without telling the players, just when it comes along in there, like, I need to make a death save, depending on what they rolled. They may say, I rolled an 11, I'm good, or I rolled a 10. I'm like, no, you're not. And then at some point, probably towards getting very close to the end of the adventure, I'll probably move it up to a 15. Just to indicate, the growing effect, basically, of the soulmonger. Now, I may leave it at 10 for the whole adventure, but right now I'm leaning towards bumping it up as we go. But by the book, they're like, you got to choose to do this from the beginning or not. So, however you want to go. Another thing to point out, this adventure is a bit of a ticking time bomb, and this is addressed on page 7, a ticking clock. Time is of the essence. Characters are under pressure to find and destroy the soulmonger quickly, since many lives depend on it. So, as a matter of fact, the person who hired you only has so many days to live. And in general, this death curse is very bad for the world, as you can imagine. And also, eventually, at your discretion as the DM, sooner or later, the Atropal will have eaten enough souls out of the soulmonger, and boom, game over. Now, I'm not going to boom game over with the Atropal unless the players are just goobering around and just wandering around acting like they don't have a care in the world, and that the person who hired them doesn't only have so many days to live because of the death curse. They have the death curse, the person that hired them. So, every day that goes by is a hit point off their hit point maximum, and closer they are to death. I mentioned earlier about the levels. Like, why would you send such low-level characters on such an important mission? Well, one of the main reasons is they weren't the first choice by the book. Syndra, who is hiring them, has sent several adventuring parties. None have returned. So it's at this point, it's like, I got to send whoever I can find. Now, the way I did it with, there's sort of a overarching narrative between adventures for our campaign where we have a guild called the Vanguard of the Eye. And the way it came up is when the request came from Syndra what's her name? Syndra Sylvain, I believe. Syndra Sylvain. And it talks more about her on page 8. When the request came in, like all the other guild groups, if you will, away teams were off doing stuff. And also there is a tie-in. The Red Wizards of Thay, by the book, are aware of the Soulmonger, and the Red Wizards of Thay are like, death magicians, death mages, and they're ruled, the entire nation of Thay is ruled by a lich, and they're very interested in the Soulmonger, so they're in Chult looking for the Soulmonger, and the people who are researching all this know that. So there's enmity between, already established from previous adventures, between the Vanguard of the Eye and the Red Wizards of Thay, and it all comes down to the legendary weapons. And this all comes back to what we did in White Plume Mountain. So not only is it like, we don't have a lot of people to send, and we can't turn down this request because it's very important. There was a way back in Lost Mine of Found Delver, the very first adventure we ran with this party, this group of players. Sildar Hallwinter, I can't remember his exact name, became a friend. He was one of the NPCs, and I had it so that Sildar and Syndra were adventuring friends, possibly even lovers from the way back in the day. And so he brought this to the guild as a personal request. And he's basically the mayor of Phandalin now, roughly. He's the most important person there and kind of helps keep the peace and helps run things. So and given the nature, like, this is pretty crazy, this whole death curse thing. So the guild didn't want to turn down the request. But at the same time, if you send a bunch of newer members who don't have any notoriety or renown yet, it's possibly less of a chance of attracting the attention of the Red Wizards of Thay, who are known to be in Chult. So there you go. So that's how I did it, was like, well, when the request came in, everybody else, like I said, is off on missions, so it's you guys. But then the leadership, well, we do have the added benefit of, of staying off, possibly under the Red Wizards of Thay's radar with these newer guild members. So that's how it came together for me. And then Sildar actually accompanied the group to Baldur's Gate, which is where I had Syndra at. and then they met with Syndra, and he, you know, did the introductions and all that. So this was kind of a, not only was it she was trying to hire the Vanguard of the Eye, but it was also a personal favor for Hildar. So there you go. But by the book, you know, it basically says that, you know, she's been sending adventurers in, and she may or may not share this with the players unless they ask, but she's been sending adventurers in, and nothing's happened. So she's starting to get like really worried, like, what is going on here? So, you know, she's kind of grasping at the bottom of the barrel, or grasping at straws or whatever in a certain way. So I've got some other notes for you here. Now, one thing I did with the players is I literally read the disclaimer. There's always a funny disclaimer on the inside credits page of the newer 5e books. And it says, I read the disclaimer. And I've made the point a couple of times to players, like, this is a dangerous adventure. But I read the disclaimer, and the disclaimer says, this adventure will make your players hate you. The kind of simmering hatred that eats away at their souls until all that remains are dark little spheres of annihilation where their hearts used to be. P.S. Don't forget to tear up their character sheets. Now, I read that, you know, haha, isn't that funny? And we were all like, haha. But I also am like making the point, like, guys, this, you know, just know going in. And they wanted to play it, right? Because listen, this adventure has undead T-Rexes that spew zombies out of their mouth. I mean, if that doesn't just give you a little hoo 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 right there, you know, then I don't know. It's the zombie spewing undead terrain. If the dancing monkey fruit doesn't do it for you, maybe the catapulting goblin village or the zombie spewing undead Tyrannosaurus will. I mean, what more could you possibly want in an adventure, right? So it also talks about in the foreword that Pendleton Ward, who's the creator of the D&D inspired animated series Adventure Time, also helped with this to, you know, for some of the storytelling and all that. That doesn't mean it's like Adventure Time in crazy weird. I always say Adventure Time is fascinating, but it's like watching a fever dream. I can only watch so much of it. But anyway, so, you know, this is dangerous. And there's also one of the things that I told my players is, you know, once you get into, and I gave them this heads up, and I said, guys, I'm just going to tell you, this is a dangerous adventure. Now, so I'm going to give you one tip. And then pretty much after that, you're on your own. It is possible, very possible, because all of the random encounters when you're in the inland exploring Chult on an expedition going through the jungle, the random encounters are not like levelized. They're not like, well, if you know, the areas of the continent are not like, well, this is safe for levels 1 through 5 and this is safe for levels 6 through 8. No, everything is, any random encounter can happen anywhere, and the random encounter difficulties are all over the place. So a first level group could run into a CR15 and I mean, it's crazy. So I told them that. So, you know, it's very important in this adventure for the players to evaluate whether they want to tackle a challenge or they want to flee. And sometimes, many times in Chult, discretion is going to be the better part of valor. Some of the things I want to point out on page 4, there's a listing of Dramatis Personae, which is a list of all the major NPCs, how to pronounce their name, what page they appear on, that sort of thing. Now, it does give a... now, for the random encounters can happen anywhere and at any level. Page 7 does give a suggested little chart of, you know, what levels should do what. And that's not by region necessarily of the continent. That's by chapter of the adventure. So, you know, when they get to this part of the adventure, suggested character level, etc. And this is a 1st through 11th level campaign. So it should be a little shorter than Out of the Abyss was a long campaign. It was, like I said, it was almost 2 campaigns separated by an intermission, really. Some other notes here. We already talked about starting at higher levels. There's some character hooks by backgrounds if you wanted on page 10. So if you're looking for hooks to get people to Chult or interested in Chult or in the adventure, the hook in the adventure, you can break it down by background. There's also 2 new backgrounds to this campaign that I'll mention. But really, I mean, in my opinion, just having Syndra hire them and send them to Chult should be sufficient. But if for some reason, that's not sufficient or enticing enough, there's other ways to get them there. So here's some notes, or to get them, started and interesting. If anything, just hire them, right? So here's some notes I made before I even started the first session with them, and like we were in session 0 and all that. Here's some notes I made. One, I made a note, read those players that disclaimer, which I already did. I made a note about meatgrinder mode with a question mark, and I've already explained how I'll probably handle that. Let's see. Yeah, there's a map of Chult for the PCs, and also one for the DM, and it's in the back, and it's detachable. Okay, so you'll want that link I referred to, the Reddit link that has all the maps and stuff, you'll probably want to use. But this, in the back of the book, you have a map that's for the DM, and this map shows areas and chances of undead in that area, and it's fully filled in, and that sort of thing. And then the other side has the outer area of Chult mapped, but none of the inside. And that's what you want to give the players. So instead of trying to, photocopy this big, huge thing, print out a couple and give them to them. That's what I did. I think I gave them to 2 or 3 players. And then every now and then you can just lay out, this big unfinished thing so everybody can, like, you're here and you're going here, blah, blah, blah. But if you want to be really nice and print one out this big and have them fill it in, that none says you can't do that. Just, be aware you don't want them looking on the back side, because it's got DM notes, right? And then you have other appendices. You've got the Trickster Gods of Omu, which will come into play later in the game. You got all kinds of handouts here for the players, which are handy. You've also got these guides. There's a lot of guides in here. There's that zombie spewing T-Rex. Oh, that's so great. And then you got the map, the smaller map you can photocopy and give to them, or print out from that link I sent you. The guides will come into play in chapter 1, because before the players set off on their expedition and start hacking through the jungle or going down a river or whatever, they're going to need to hire a guide. Okay? I mean, they can go off without a guide, but that's kind of stupid. So this is a way without, to make it more role-playing, where you get hand them these little, I picked out some guides that I thought were interesting, and let them choose. Like they were interviewing guides. I don't know if you can hear that bird or not, but I guess the sun's about to go down, so a bird has decided it wants to start singing. Maybe it's to give a little bit of jungle ambiance. I don't know. All right. What else? All right. Yeah, there's 2 new character backgrounds, the anthropologist and the archaeologist. So I made sure that my players knew about that during session 0. Already talked about the Vanguard of the Eye tie-in, how I was going to do that. I did have a player who had been asking for a while to play a tabaxi. And the tabaxi are the cat people who are like one of the native peoples of Chult. And, normally I say if it's in the player's handbook or in the Sword Coast Adventurer's Guide, good. Other than that, only on a case-by-case basis. But this player had genuinely, for like a year, I think since Volos came out. Was it Volos where they first appeared? I'm not sure. But anyway, they really wanted to play a tabaxi, and it, you know, for like a year they've been talking about it. So I was like, you can absolutely play a tabaxi, but this tabaxi has been in Faerun, you know, in the main Forgotten Realms continent, and we'll be going to Chult as basically an outsider, and they were cool with that. And then I had another player wanted to play a lizard folk. And I'm like, you know, why are you wanting to play a wizard folk? And this is where metagaming comes into a little bit. This kind of ties back in to, you know, should you know ahead of time what the adventure is going to be before you roll up your character? Because it can, even unconsciously or not without even really thinking about it, can lead to metagaming, right? I'm going to make a character for that adventure, not the character that I think is interesting or whatever. And it turned out that, yes, they wanted to, they were thinking, well, I could be a druid and do dinosaurs and stuff, you know, as a lizard and all, you know, all these amazing things. And I was like, okay, but this is a good player. They're not a sneaky, cheaty player or anything like that. It was just a concept they were kind of thinking out. So I got these fate dice that you use with fate that have plus or minuses on them. And I said, you know what? Let's see. And I rolled it. And I was like, if you get a, you know, we'll do 2 out of 3. And if you get more pluses than minuses, then you can do it. And he did. And so it's actually ended up being like one of the more interesting characters because as they're in Chult, you know, there's, as far as I know, there's not a lot of lizard folk in Chult. There's other reptilian humanoids and creatures and stuff, but not a lot of lizard folk. So they're like, you are beautiful, man. Like everybody's loving this lizard. Like, you are beautiful. Where are you from, man? And we've also, you know, what the player doesn't know, because this lizard folk just kind of came out of nowhere, and he, you know, he's more intelligent and wiser and stuff than your average lizard folk, was found by a druid just kind of staggering around in a swamp and has been trained as a druid. Well, this used to be a human being that was basically polymorphed into a lizard folk. And that, you know, I'm never going to force the player to go back to being a human. Okay, but that is going to be part of, because he's like, he told me as his backstory that I just found wandering around, and this druid took me under his wing. So I'm like, ooh, okay, so you're a polymorphed human into a lizard folk, and you don't even know that. Like, that the player doesn't know. And like I said, I will never force them to go back to being a human. Right, it's for they're going to always be a lizard folk. But there's also, we had some fun with the tabaxi and the lizard folk. You know, the quirks they get. Like the lizard folk, this character doesn't understand emotion. It can pick up when emotional things are going on, but it doesn't understand normal humanoid emotion. So it just laughs every time. Like somebody could come up just totally distraught and upset, and he'll laugh because he's like, well, I must exhibit an emotional response. So it's turning into a lot of fun. Anyway, all right. So we got a tabaxi. We've got a lizard folk. Syndra Sylvain, who's the person that hires them, and she's got the death curse. When she meets with them, as you'll see in the book, she's all covered up and it's got gloves on and is speaking through a mask. And, you know, it's kind of, you can't even tell, is she male or female or whatever, because she's starting to look kind of messed up because of this death curse. So Syndra Sylvain, I said she's friends with Sildar Hallwinter. So he approached the guild on her behalf, and the party was sent to Baldur's Gate with Sildar. So, you know, when they get to Baldur's Gate and meet up with her, there's a little bit of negotiation, but then after that, boom, they're gone. So once she hires them, now you can do this different. They can take a boat or they can do whatever to try to get to its Port Nyanzaru, which is the main city, port, what have you, very cosmopolitan, all kinds of cosmopolitan, all kinds of different races. And it's really the only touristy area in Chult. It's this big port. And so they could take a boat there if they want, but she'll just boom, teleport them. She needs to get them there quick. She's like, go. So as soon as the agreements are made and they're hired and all of that, she sends them in and teleports them, and she goes with them because she knows people there. So I'll briefly go over Syndra, what happens with Syndra at the beginning, and then we'll wrap up this video, and I'll take up next session with what happens once they actually get to Chult. With dinosaur racing. Dinosaur racing. NASCAR with dinosaurs. This adventure is bonkers and a lot of fun. Okay, so all right, let's see what else we got here. Yeah, so Syndra asked them to come. Says for the past several days, the talk of the streets and etc. has been the death curse, etc. There's some introductory text on page 8. You've been invited to the home of Syndra Sylvain, a retired adventurer and merchant. When you arrive, there's a person seated in an overstuffed chair near the fire. You can't discern a gender because only the person's head emerges from under a heavy blanket draped over the fire. An embroidered hood and silver mask conceal the wearer's face. Even the person's dry or raspy voice provides no clue. Help yourselves to wine and seat yourselves, friend. I hope that I may call you that. So Syndra is an archmage. She's a retired adventurer. She evidently was raised at some point or resurrected because she now has the death curse. It's been going on for 20 days, so her hit point maximum is now 79, so it must have originally been 99. Decreases by 1 every midnight, so you've basically got 79 days to save Syndra, if you think about it. And the only way to save her is destroy the Soulmonger. So if her hit point maximum drops to 0, she dies, can't be brought back from the dead until the death curse is ended, and assuming that the Soulmonger or that creature hasn't eaten her soul. So there's some role-playing notes on page 8 for Syndra. She's got some contacts in the Harpers. The Harpers have learned that the cause of death curse is a necromantic artifact called the Soulmonger. According to the sources, the Soulmonger is somewhere on Chult. So she tells a little bit about Chult. Mountains and rainforests, enormous reptiles, savage goblins, an army of undead. That's one thing. Chult is infested with undead. And my players kept asking, is this because of the Soulmonger? And I'm like, as far as you know, Chult has had a lot of undead for a long time. Maybe it's worse because of the Soulmonger, but you don't know that for sure. But the undead in Chult are not related to the Soulmonger directly. They're just there. So she puts together everything she knows about Chult into a map, and that's that map that you give them. And then she says, when you're ready to depart, I will teleport us all to Port Nyanzaru, the only major settlement in Chult. And then once she's there, she'll stay with a friend named Wakanga Atamu. He's one of 7 merchant princes who rule the city. And by the way, he's also the only source really of most magic items and stuff, vendor-wise, like really good magic stuff. And that's his merchant trade, is books and magic items and stuff. And if the characters ask Syndra to seek out a more experienced party of adventurers, she replies dryly, I always have, or I already have. So, as we talked about earlier. Syndra promises each character a rare uncommon magic item delivered upon successful completion of her quest. At the end of the adventure, each player can choose an appropriate item subject to your approval. Syndra also expects the characters will find enough treasure in Chult to make them rich as kings, which is true. I mean, it's an adventure. And if the characters press, then she will give them each 50 gold pieces to defray expenses in Port Nyanzaru. Now, my party of adventurers, my players asked for that, and it was very helpful. You may just want to go ahead and offer that, because there is some outfitting that needs to happen before you do an expedition. And at that point, the minute they're like, yeah, we'll do it, Syndra teleports the characters to Port Nyanzaru in the harbor ward. I mean, it's boom. Bye-bye. Wizard! Off we go. We're off to the races, in the dinosaur races. So that's kind of the introduction to Chult. Or to the adventure, what gets things going. You can either start them off in Baldur's Gate or send them to Baldur's Gate or whatever where she's at. I would try to keep them from wanting to take a boat, because a lot of players are, I want to have a sea adventure. Remember, Syndra's time is limited. So she's wanting to teleport them there and get this going as quick as possible. Part of the fun, the energy of this adventure, if you will, is it's a ticking time bomb. We got to do this quick. Now, if you want to change things up as the DM, that's fine. But I like that sense of urgency. And you have a little fun. My players ran around Port Nyanzaru for a few days into the dinosaur races, of course, but you do want to have kind of a little bit of a time sensitivity, a sense of urgency. Now, the rest of the chapter, before you get to, well, that's actually the introduction. Before you get to chapter 1, there's some good notes on Chultans. They're, what they're like, how they dress, their names. There's some information about races on Chult, the Arakakra, which are kind of bird people. You've got goblins called Batiri. They're kind of like native goblin things. You got dwarves, frost giants, grungs, and those are kind of frog folk. Undead, of course, tabaxi. You got terra folk, which are basically pterodactyl humanoids, were-tigers, and Wanti. Those are all very important to Chult. There's some information on the gods of Chult on page 14. I would recommend looking over. And then, it talks about the weather. Hot, humid, and rainy throughout the year. The temperature regularly climbs as high as 95 degrees during the day and seldom falls below 70 at night. There's a day without rain is rare. Talks about visibility in the rain. There's a chance, what your chance of full-blown tropical storms are, et cetera, et cetera. If you're traveling by river and you get in a tropical storm, what could happen? If you're traveling by foot and you get a tropical storm, what could happen, et cetera. So I would recommend checking all that out. So thanks so much for listening. I'll be back soon with episode number 2, where we get into really the meat of things of what happens when the players arrive in Port Nyanzaru. Thanks so much for watching, and we will catch you next time on Shame Plays.
There is only darkness for you, and only death for your people. These ancients are just the beginning. I will command a great and terrible army, and we will sail to 1 billion worlds. We will sail until every light has been extinguished. You are strong, child, but I am beyond strength. I am the end. And I have come for you.